this lesson, we'll cover sprinklers. So sprinklers are actually a fire suppression element that's part of a plumbing system. The sprinkler heads can come in a variety of different types and belong to a variety of different families. Typically, the sprinklers are face-mounted, meaning they need to be bound to a face or a surface within Revit. Now that could be a wall, could be a ceiling, it actually could be a drop ceiling or a slab or a soffit. Now you also can have non-surface mounted fixtures too. And typically where you would see those are in mechanical closets or areas that doesn't have a ceiling. For what we're doing in this lesson though, we'll be placing sprinklers on a surface or against the face. So the room we'll look at in this example is the room in the lower left. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And in this room in the lower left, we see we actually have a ceiling grid. We have some diffusers. And if we look closely, we have 4 actual sprinkler heads already defined. I need to add 2 more. But first, to make this a little clearer, maybe I want to actually turn off or hide in this view the actual diffusers. So to hide those diffusers, I can select one, right-click my mouse, choose Hide in View category. That will actually hide these elements in this view for this exercise. Now, to place the other 2 sprinklers, let's go to the Systems tab on your ribbon, and in the Plumbing and Piping area of your ribbon, click Sprinkler. This will open up a listing of sprinklers in the Properties area on the left. Now, by default, there's only one loaded, so we'll select it. Over on the right side of your ribbon is a placement area. This is where we can define how these sprinklers should be placed within our Revit model. Since we're placing this on a face, particularly a ceiling grid or a soffit, for example, we'll choose Place on Face. Now when you move your mouse over the ceiling grid, you can see the display of the sprinkler. Simply left-click to place the 2 additional sprinklers in line with the existing sprinklers that are already on the ceiling. When done, click Modify. In this lesson, we looked at placing sprinklers. We talked about sprinklers and how they're part of a fire suppression system, and they belong to plumbing systems. The sprinklers can come in a variety of different types and belong to different families. But typically, the sprinklers are surface or face mounted. And that could be a wall, it could be a ceiling, it could be a soffit, or a drop ceiling. But there are non-hosted sprinklers, and those are typically used in areas that do not have ceilings. Mechanical rooms, for example. And the last thing we did was we placed the sprinklers within our Revit model using the sprinkler command located on the Systems tab of the ribbon. In this lesson, we'll cover sprinkler systems. So we've already created 6 sprinkler heads. Now what we need to do is combine those into a sprinkler system. From there, we can route our pipes from sprinkler to sprinkler within the system itself. So how do we go about adding these sprinklers to a sprinkler system? Well, one method is to select a sprinkler head. So just go ahead and pick on the sprinkler in the upper left. When you select this sprinkler, if it belongs to a system already, you'll see an option on the ribbon for editing the system. If it does not belong to a system, on the very right of the ribbon, you'll see Create Systems, and particularly Piping. Go ahead and click Piping. Next, it'll ask you what type of system are we creating. Well, by default, it knows it's a sprinkler, therefore it picks up a fire protection wet system. I can give the system a name, and I can open it in the system editor if you want at this moment. But for right now, let's just accept the default name and click OK. This will then add the 1 sprinkler to the sprinkler piping system. And I can see it highlighted or surrounded by a dashed box. What I need to do now are add the other 5 sprinklers to the system. To do that, with the sprinkler still selected, choose Edit System from the ribbon. The Sprinkler System Edit menu ribbon will now appear. On the ribbon, verify Add the System is selected. With this selected, you can mouse over sprinklers that are not currently added to the system, for example, the ones in gray, and select on those, and they'll be added to this current sprinkler system. If you were to select something belonging to another system, Revit will notify you of that, and if you chose to add it to the system, it'll remove it from the other system, adding it to this system. Now, if you know you have specific equipment, pumps, for example, that are built into the actual fire system, and you want to select that equipment, you can actually choose that by picking Select Equipment. If the equipment is already in the project, but you visually don't see it, you can choose it from the drop-down list. Once we're done adding the sprinklers to the system, simply click Finish Editing System. This now adds the sprinklers to this new system. To verify they were added, simply click on one of the sprinklers. You should now see a piping option for Piping System on the ribbon. Clicking Piping System will allow me to actually view what system these belong to, and visually on the screen, you'll see these surrounded by a dashed box. Go ahead and click anywhere on the screen to deselect. So as a review, in this lesson, we looked at creating sprinkler systems. We first looked at if a sprinkler belongs to a system by simply selecting the sprinkler. Since it didn't belong to a system, we were given an option on the ribbon to create a new system, particularly a piping system. When we selected this, Revit prompted us to choose a type of system, in this case a fire suppression wet system. We gave the system a name, and then we added the other 5 sprinklers to the system. You can also add mechanical equipment within the system if that equipment also existed in our Revit project. And lastly, we looked at the actual sprinkler to verify it was connected to our new system. In this lesson, we'll cover sprinkler pipe layouts. So we've already created sprinkler heads, and we've already added those sprinklers to a piping system. Now the last step is to actually draw the piping layout. You have 2 methods on how to do that. Manual, basically drawing your pipes and routing your pipes from sprinkler head to sprinkler head, or to your mechanical equipment from the sprinkler heads. Or the second option is to allow Revit to lay out the pipes for you using the automatic method. Usually when you're laying out plumbing for sprinkler heads, it's pretty symmetrical. Straight lines, common path, common branches off of a main tree. So the automatic method is best suited for this type of design. In order to do this, we first need to select our sprinkler heads that we want to route piping for. So in my model, I'm going to zoom in so I can see the 6 sprinkler heads a little better. And then I'm going to drag a window from the left to the right, only surrounding the 6 sprinkler heads. If you accidentally pick more items, you can use the filter icon in the upper right part of your ribbon to filter out those elements. Or you could always hold the Control key and simply select each of the sprinklers. Now with these selected, what I'm going to do is use the Auto Generate Piping Layout tool. On the ribbon in the Layout panel, you have Generate Layout. Go ahead and click Generate Layout. This will then present the actual solution bar plus some settings for designing and laying out this piping system. For slope, I'm going to turn the slope value off. In other words, I'll set it to 0%. Now I have multiple options on the options bar of how this design can be laid out. Right now, the solution is set to network. But if I change it to perimeter, I now have a perimeter design. And you have 5 options of the perimeter design. And I can hit the next button, cycling through all of those options. I can also look at intersections. I have 2 options for intersection. And I'm going to go back to network, because network actually had the best solution for what we're looking at. The settings button all the way on the right, or your option bar, contains the setting for the actual main branch of the actual plumbing system, and also the secondary branches, or the limbs that come out from the main branch or the trunk. This is the setting the pipe type and also the offset value. Click OK on the pipe conversion settings. So basically at this point, we've already selected our sprinkler heads. We've already routed this based on the solution that Revit provided for us. We could add more elements if we had more sprinklers to add, or we could remove some of these from the system. But right now, the only thing left to do is click Finish Layout. Now, one thing to note, if you did want to manually modify this layout, you could click Edit Layout in the upper left part of your ribbon. However, we're finished laying this out, and this is the solution that I want to use. So click Finish Layout. Revit will then route the pipes with the appropriate fittings, elbows, T's, and other elements into your piping system. If I zoom in a little closer in the piping system, I can actually see those connections. Changing the detail to a more fine detail will display this information if I zoom in. Or I can define this just as a coarse individual lines, depending on the layout and look that you want for this view. Now, to see the information of the piping system itself, simply click on one element of the piping system. You'll display the properties in the left of the property area. And then if you click Edit Type, you can actually see the type settings. In here, I can verify or look at my routing preferences. So to the right of routing preferences, look at it. These are all the settings for the elbows, the junctions, the T's, the unions, and other elements within your piping system. This is where you can set all of those different criteria. Just click Cancel and cancel again. And if anything is selected, just select in the background the deselect elements. So as a review, in this lesson, we looked at creating sprinkler pipe layouts. We used the automatic method to generate our piping layout from the sprinklers that we pre-selected. Typically, sprinkler piping layouts are symmetrical, so the automatic method worked really well. Once we selected the actual sprinklers, we chose to generate a solution, and Revit presented us with various solutions on how to lay out these pipes. We looked at those solutions and then chose the best one for this scenario. Once we selected that, we chose to create the piping system, and then once the actual piping system was created, we looked at the actual settings of the piping system to see what the variables were and the different fixtures for our elbows, our T's, our unions, and other elements within the piping system. In this lesson, we'll cover fabrication settings. So inside of Revit, on the ribbon, click the Systems tab. On the Systems tab, you'll have a fabrication area. First thing you need to set up are your fabrication settings. To do this, click the drop-down arrow to the right of the word fabrication, and your fabrication settings will appear. Now, the first time you're running fabrication, you will need to have and load the configuration in. Hence, if you look at the screen where I have none for the drop-down for configuration, if you click the drop-down and you no longer see a configuration, you actually need to run or install a configuration file. To do this, you can download it from the actual link on the bottom. It says Learn How to Set Up Fabrication, Configuration, and Services. Or you can run the installer that's included. You'll have a file called Imperial Revit MEP Fabrication Sample Configuration. Now there's also one for metric. I don't include the metric one, but you can download that one if you want to run that one. To run this, simply double-click, select Run, and then follow through the steps. Yes for any type of Windows authentication or approval. And then when done, click Finish. Now after that is loaded back inside of Revit, close the window, go back to Fabrication, and you'll actually now see the fabrication configuration created. Now again, we're using for this example just a sample configuration provided by Revit. So I'm going to choose the sample configuration. Once I do that, I'll have a variety of services on the left that I can load into this current project. You can choose as many as you want or as few as you want, depending upon what you're actually designing. To select all of them, you can simply click each one, or select the first one, hold your Shift key, and select the last one. Then click Add. This adds and will load these services into this current Revit project. When done, click OK. Now when you do that, Revit may take a few minutes to load each and every service that you select into this current project. And if this is the first time you are running this, you'll actually have to install the configuration file using the actual installer. Or again, you can click the blue link on the bottom of this screen, which will open another window and allow you to download those services. The one that I provided is for Imperial units only, not for metric. So if you want to use metric, you'll have to download the metric file. Now with those loaded, if you want to go back to the fabrication dropdown for settings, you'll actually see the settings stay and the services are loaded. Click OK. So as a review, in this lesson, we looked at fabrication settings. We looked at how we first must install a file for the configuration, either an Imperial or metric unit, before we use fabrication. To do that, I included the actual Imperial installer file, or I showed you how to click the link inside of the settings window to download those. Once those have been run and installed, you can actually load the services into your Revit project. In this lesson, we'll cover placing fabrication parts. So for the previous lesson, we covered setting up and including the fabrication settings. First thing we needed to do is run an installer to actually load the services for our actual fabrication. So once we have that done, we can actually use fabrication on our actual projects. So first, let's click the fabrication part icon on the Systems tab. This will open up the fabrications part window on the very right. Now, if I don't see a service or a group, that means I have to click settings to actually verify the configuration is loading into this project. So to do that, click settings in the lower right, and then from the drop down for configuration, choose Revit MEP Imperial Content version 1. Now again, the reason that is there is because we installed that from the previous lesson. If you currently do not have this here, go back to the previous lesson fabrication settings to load this in. Go ahead and select that. And for services for this lesson, choose the first one, ductwork plus 2-inch WG, and click Add. Once you do that, click OK. Now you could load in all of the other ones if you want, but for time purposes, I'm only loading the first actual service. With that service loaded, on the very right of your screen, you see services and groups. So depending upon how many services you loaded, you would see those in the service dropdown. The group is a sub or secondary selection for the service. So you could change this as well depending upon what you wanted to place inside of your model. I'm going to leave it set to rectangular. Then you'll see a variety of elements actually displayed. Some of these elements will have dropdowns. And if they have dropdowns, that means you can choose different sizes or options for those depending upon what you're placing, such as this 90-degree elbow has a selection of different options. Let's go back to the RECT group, a rectangular. Scroll all the way down to the bottom, and what I want to place is an end cap. I'm going to choose the end cap S&D. Once you select that, move your mouse on the screen. Now, several things happen. One is the ribbon changes in the upper right to the Place Fabrication Part Tools, and the property box on the left changes, depicting the properties of this element. To place this, simply move into an existing ductwork system, and once you see the snap grid points, go ahead and click. This will actually place that element inside of your existing ductwork. To end this part of the command, click Modify or Escape. Now, fabrication part is sticky, so it stays turned on until you turn it off, meaning if I click fabrication part again on the ribbon, it will turn off that part of my screen on the right. So as a review, in this lesson, we covered placing fabrication parts. We first talked about loading fabrication settings. If those weren't loaded, I referenced the previous lesson, fabrication settings, to load those in. Once the settings are loaded, you can choose which service you want, or services, and then run fabrication parts. We then looked at the fabrication part menus, basically the service and the groups, the options of those service and groups, and then how to drag and drop and place an element from the fabrication part menu. In this lesson, we'll cover fabrication part placement tools. So in the previous lessons, we first loaded in our fabrication settings, and then we learned how to place the fabrication parts. Now this lesson, we'll look at the tools to assist us when we place those parts. So we're going to add a 90-degree elbow to our existing duct system on the left. So to start, let's go to the Systems tab, click Fabrication Part, and that'll enable the actual fabrication menu on the right. Verify ductwork 2-inch is selected as a service, and rectangular is selected for the group. Scroll down and choose Radius Elbow, and then move your mouse on the screen. Now when you do that, you see you're holding a 90-degree elbow, and you're actually holding it on one end. Now on the right side of your ribbon, you have several options. Toggle connector means it will actually toggle what side of the actual element you're holding. So in this case, I'm holding it on the left. If I click toggle connector, now I'll be holding it on the opposite side. Rotate part means it'll actually rotate the part before placement or before it's attached to anything. So as you cycle through, clicking rotate part, it'll actually rotate the element around on the screen. Edit part will actually open the part and allow you to edit its values in settings. Here you can see the various dimensions and connector options for editing the actual part. Click Cancel on the edit part. Smart snapping means it'll actually snap to an element or a placement that is connecting or can connect to this type of ductwork. So with these settings set, or as you toggle through those settings, move the actual ductwork over the left side of the trunk coming out of the duct system. When you do, you'll see it automatically snap to that ductwork and it'll resize. Now, if the 90-degree angle is rotated in the wrong direction, before you click the space bar and keep clicking the space bar, and as you do, it will rotate the ductwork in 90-degree increments. Once you have it set where you like it, simply left click and that will add that fabrication part, in this case this 90-degree angle, to the duct system. When you're done, hit Escape or Modify to end the current command. As a review, in this lesson, we looked at fabrication part placement tools. We started the fabrication part command, and then we looked at tools to rotate the part, toggle which end of the part we're holding. We even looked at how to edit the part. And then we left the smart connecting tools on, so that way when we move the part over an adjacent place where it can connect, such as an existing piece of ductwork, it'll automatically size and connect to that endpoint. And then we looked at the utilization of the space bar to rotate that off the point it is connected. In this lesson, we'll cover electrical components, specifically electrical devices. So you may say, well, what's the difference between an electrical device and electrical equipment? Well, electrical equipment are things like your electrical panel boxes or electrical transformers. Electrical devices are things like your switches or your outlets or your data ports for phone or internet. To place these elements, let's go to the System tab on your ribbon. In the Systems tab, the electrical panel, choose the device dropdown, and you'll see the various different types of electrical devices that you can insert into your Revit model. In this example here, we'll just choose lighting. So it's basically a light switch. Now, if you don't have any loaded in, or you need to load additional types of devices in, just click Load Family. However, we're going to use one of the ones already loaded in this Revit project. For example, we'll choose the single pole light switch. Now, like all other elements inside Revit, it needs to be placed with a host. So on the ribbon on the very right in the Placement tab, Place on Face is selected, meaning I have to pick a physical face of a host to place this on. So logically thinking, we're going to place the switch on a wall. So I'm in an elevation view that's actually cropped. And I can mouse over the wall, and when I mouse over the wall, I actually see the wall highlight. Now I'll zoom in so I have the placement for this. And I can align this to another switch that currently exists or an outlet, or freely place this wherever I choose. Go ahead and click to actually place the switch. Now again, I can continue on placing additional switches or click Modify to end the placement. After the switch is placed, you can click the switch, modify the dimensions, or use your align tools to align the switch at the correct dimensional value above the finished floor or relative to an adjacent door or window. You can also change the properties of the electrical switch on the left in the property area. Go ahead and click in the background to deselect the switch. So as a review in this lesson, we covered electrical devices. We talked about the differences between an electrical device and electrical equipment. Where electrical devices are things like your light switches, or your outlets, or your data ports for phone and internet. We then looked at placing an electrical device such as a light switch on a wall. The electrical device has to be hosted on a face, so we chose a wall connecting the switch to the face of a wall. We then looked at the properties of the switch and how it's connected to the wall as its host, and viewed the actual dimensional values to change the location and position of the switch on the wall. In this lesson, we'll cover editing a fabrication part. So you may say, well, what is editing a fabrication part if in the previous lesson we edited fabrication parts using the editing tools? Well, editing a fabrication part means changing its values or its connector types. So for example, to do that, in the model we have on our screen, I'm going to choose the last piece of ductwork. With it selected, the ribbon changes, and on the ribbon, I'll choose Edit Part. When you do that, properties for this actual fabrication part open up. The first tab on the right is the dimensions of this part. Now, depending upon what type of part you choose, will show different or more dimensions. Here's where I can change the value from what it's currently set at to something different. You also have a tab for connectors. Again, depending upon the part, there may be more or less connectors. Here, you can change the end type of connector or the connector type on each end. You can also lock these. Click OK or Cancel once you're done. Same thing is true for other parts. If I choose the end cap, I can click Edit Part for it, and I can view its values. Similar dimensions, a little different though because of the type of part this is. And the connector here only has one connector, hence how it's connected in as an end cap. Click Cancel. For the elbow, similar situation. If I click the elbow itself, if you click Edit Part on the ribbon, you can also click in the property area on the left as well. And here, similar things. However, for this, I have multiple dimensions. You also have these two end connectors that you can change. Click OK. So as a review, in this lesson, we covered what editing a fabrication part means. We then looked at how to edit the dimensional values of the part we're editing, and we also looked at how to edit the connectors for each end of that part that we are editing as well.